Well, hello everybody. Thank you for being here. As you all know, the independent investigation by the UC Center for Laboratory Safety came out today regarding the March 16th accident in the Post building here on campus. And so Vice Chancellor rather, for research for UH Manoa, Michael Bruno's here to take any questions, and I can also take questions for you. Basically we want to thank the UC Center for their outstanding work on this, not only in their investigation and also all of the recommendations that they have made. The University of Hawaiʻi has taken a number of steps already to basically implement a lot of these recommendations, and we can discuss that more. And so with that, I think we can open it up to questions. Mike, would you come on up? Who would like to start?
What's the main finding of the report when it comes to the cause? Anything different that we've already learned?
Yes, there was a significant difference from what we originally thought based on the report from the Hawaii Fire Department, Honolulu Fire Department. And that initial report pinned the cause on I wouldn't call it a defect in the pressure gauge, but an operation involving the pressure gauge that the postdoc was using, the researcher was using. The UC team has determined, based on their analysis, that it was rather a static electricity release into the tank that caused the explosion. The reason that's significant is, in their view, and this is not, I should say, they made clear this is the most likely cause. They have no doubt that the origin of the electrical discharge that caused the ignition was around that gauge. Their thinking now is that when the researcher made contact with the gauge, that there was electrostatic electricity present either in the tank and was released when there was a grounding then, or was present in the researcher. And their assessment is that it did not require a significant discharge of electricity to ignite the mixture, and that was the likely cause. So that's a fairly significant change in the conclusion.
Is that something that was preventable or foreseeable?
It's a difficult question to answer. Hindsight is always 20/20. By all accounts and from everything we know so far, there were many efforts to make this process as safe as possible. And in fact, the exact same experiment essentially had been conducted 10 or perhaps 11 times prior to this accident occurring. So I would think that if one asked the researcher or the principal investigator, neither of them envisioned that this could happen.
The investigators said in the report that it was like 13 days or so before they were able to get into the investigation, and that made things a little challenging. Why weren't they allowed in earlier? What happened with that?
Well, first of all, there was the need to respond to the emergency. There was the need to bring in a crew to clean up not necessarily the debris, but there was a lot of blood and damage that needed to be carefully cleaned up, with biosafety.
And also, too, the center had to be retained.
Well, that's right. But I mean, what I'm thinking in my head is the timeline. So first came the response and the fire department in there. Then came the essential cleanup. The cleanup lasted a few days to make sure that it was a safe environment in which people could enter. Once people were able to enter, the next step was to ensure that structurally the building was sound. So remember, the building was closed until we could bring structural engineers in there to ascertain whether there was significant damage to the structure. There was a supporting column right at this room. So now you're talking about several days. In that process, the team coming together decided that our best route forward was to hire an independent third party to come in and do an investigation, a thorough investigation. It then took a few days to look around, frankly, and see who was the best in the United States in our determination. It is the University of California Center for Laboratory Safety. I think we still believe that that is the case. They were incredibly professional and responsive. So again, going timeline, I believe it was less or approximately a week from when we engaged them to when the team was physically present here in Hawaii. So it was remarkably responsive on their part. So you might read it and say, gee, it took 13 days to gain access. That was very, very quick. We made sure that the room was secured after all of those things I just described. The cleanup to make it safe, the assurance that the building and the room were structurally sound. At that point, everything was closed off and awaited the entry of the investigating team.
And also, the fire department was investigating in that time period, and so was HIOSH as well.
Yeah.
The investigative team in the report, can you list, there's a section of some of the weaknesses that they found with the UH lab safety program. Can you go into detail on those?
Yeah. This may sound like an interesting statement on my part, but we look at those recommendations not as a criticism of what exists now, but as a path forward, not only for us, but if you read the report carefully, this is basically a call for action on a national scale, all universities and all forms of laboratories. So we were already taking many of the measures, many of the actions that you are reading in that report. In fact, within 2 days of their arrival, we had a briefing where many of us sat and they went through for several hours their initial findings, but then they went on and said, where we feel the field ought to be going is this and this and this. They may not be, and many of the things that you find there are not required by standards. They're not required by code. They are in the state of the art, and that's what this center constitutes. In the eyes of the state-of-the-art Center for Laboratory Safety, these are now the best practices in today's world with today's technologies. So we started taking those. So they outlined in that initial briefing several months ago those steps. Many of those steps have already been taken. And we will continue. There are new recommendations and guidance in this document that did not come through in that initial briefing. So we are, all of us, going through this report very carefully to make the necessary improvements.
Can you talk about the steps that UH has taken and then the new recommendations?
Yes.
And then the new steps that will be taken?
Yeah, we immediately created a new safety committee on campus, of physical and chemical hazards committee that had not existed before. I appointed faculty from each school and unit that conducts experiments, conducts research in domains that should reside under this, physical and chemical safety protocol. Those faculty have been appointed. We have met already, and they all have the report now, and we'll be following through with those faculty. It's important to have, in my view, faculty on a committee like this because they are the ones on the ground. They're the ones dealing, in my mind, not only with faculty but also students. Because an important part here, and this came through in the initial briefing and in the report, is that this involves a culture change. It involves a cultural move to a safety is all of us mindset from the student, graduate students, postdoctoral researchers, the faculty, the deans, directors, and my office. It requires all of us. So that committee is in place. HNEI, the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute, shut down all operations that involve working with flammable materials, gases under pressure. They are still shut down to this day. Their response was extraordinary. It was really extraordinary. They have gone through a lab by lab, project by project examination of all of the research being conducted in the Institute. They've developed new safety protocols, a few layers of protocols. They've worked with our Environmental and Health Safety Office in tandem to conduct inspections, interviews, review protocols and processes and make those improvements. And I was told today that their labs will be ready to be open next week. But that just tells you, and this is a multi-million-dollar a year institute, and they elected to voluntarily shut down all operations. By the way, the UC report and the team never asked them to do that. These guys shut down on their own. I can also tell you that many other labs and units at the university, as you might expect, took really serious note of this accident and immediately began doing inspections, assessments, and where necessary, some additional training.
In the previous presser, you mentioned that there was a smaller explosion that was not reported prior to the big explosion. What did the investigative team conclude about that?
First of all, it was reported. The researcher experienced an event in a small version of a similar experiment. So this was in a much smaller pressure vessel. She did report it to the principal investigator. At this point, what looks like a tragic decision was, okay, we're going to change everything. We're going to make sure we're safe. We're never going to use that vessel again. And that combination of vessel and pressure gauge. In hindsight, that was not the right interpretation of what had happened, but if the principal investigator or the researcher were here today, I'm sure they would say, we discussed this and we took what we thought was the right measure to make this project continue in a safe way, and tragically that was not the right interpretation.
Something else that will be addressed as we update our safety protocols and procedures and to make sure that type of thing doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
Does that have to do with the PRI advised you not to use the same vessel again? But then did she use the same vessel again?
No. The vessel that was used during the course of the accident was a larger vessel, quite different from the one that experienced the initial event. Let's call it an event. There was the interpretation. What happened was there was some sort of an ignition in that smaller pressure vessel, perhaps for the same reason as the follow-on, much stronger event, but that's not 100% clear now. But it appears that was a foretelling of what was going to happen the next day. Yeah.
And then so the investigators said also they weren't able to talk to the researcher who was injured. Why is that?
I think we all need to respect the situation with respect to the researcher. She went through a tragic and traumatic experience that I don't think any of us can even imagine. She was conscious throughout, and she elected not to have contact while she was in the hospital. Soon after she left the hospital, she went back to her native United Kingdom, and so we have not, to this day, been able to speak to the researcher. However, the Honolulu Fire Department was able to speak to the researcher, and she provided, in the immediate aftermath of the explosion and in a follow-on at the hospital, she provided really critical information that helped them and then us piece together exactly what happened. So, and we had to wait, and the UC team had to wait until that fire department was officially released before we finally got that firsthand information. By then, the UC team had, by the evidence, the physical evidence, they had come to some preliminary conclusions, and those conclusions were made more solid by the interview outcome.
How much did the UC investigation cost? And can you give us an estimate on how much the implementation or adoption of the recommendations might cost?
Yeah, I don't have that figure for you, right?
I have
do
that
you?
information. I can give it to you offline. Yeah.
Okay. As far as the follow-on, I'm not prepared to answer that. We have, there's been a continuous, as I said, the labs that operate with anything similar to what was being worked with, in other words, flammable gases, gases under pressure, immediately in March began to examine their operations and assess what they could do to make them more safe. So we've been internally dealing with those costs. Nobody has, so this is not a matter of us waiting around to request some special budget so we could take care of everything in one fell swoop. We are dealing with these costs on an ongoing basis, and we will continue to do that for as long as it takes.
Biggest lesson learned from all of this?
You know, I've done a lot of thinking about this, and we all have a lot of discussions. When you have protocols and processes to make labs as safe as possible, whether they are research or teaching labs. I guess where I am right now is, fundamentally we realize technology is changing so fast. Our ability to conduct experiments, our sensing equipment are so much more sophisticated than even 5 years ago. And so there's a challenge there to assess the risks, to properly train the individuals who are operating these pieces of equipment. But then layered over there, and this is what I've been doing a lot of thinking about, layered on top of that is the academic environment in which you have students coming in, perhaps in September, and exiting in May. And a new group comes in the summer. And so you need to be cognizant. And the same is true with faculty and researchers. It's a fluid situation, not just in terms of the technology, but also in terms of the individuals. And safety resides with individuals, and so there needs to be, I think, and what the UC team was saying, a national recognition of a need for an ongoing process of training, the renewal, reflection, assessment of our processes and protocols. This can't be a stagnant situation. So I think, for me, that's the biggest lesson learned. We need to be not just vigilant, but we need to be open to changing our processes in an ongoing way as technologies change, and in particular as people change. The people are the source of safety. That's a major lesson learned here.
You mentioned certain lab activities have been shut down. Can you just go over again what has been shut down and what you're expecting to restart?
Yeah, every lab that involved the use of flammable or pressurized gases has been shut down since the day of the accident. And they have not opened. Our expectation is they will begin to be open next week. And that is only after an exhaustive review of the equipment, the safety procedures, the processes, and the training. And where needed, those were done, those were reworked.
And that's what I handed out to everybody, is the new, basically the walkthrough for the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute. It's very detailed, as you can see, and it's something that was updated and then worked on by their faculty, and is now being instituted.
How many labs are we talking about, you know?
I'm
How many
sorry?
labs?
I don't have that.
I'll
You-
find that out for you.
yeah.
But there's over 500 labs on Manoa.
On the UH Manoa campus, there are over 500 labs. That does not mean there are over 500 labs that are using flammable and pressurized gases or mixtures, but that's the number. And we know that number because we have processes whereby those labs are inspected annually. This is quite an undertaking.
The Chemical and Physical Hazards Committee, you mentioned schools and colleges. Can you say how many, give a number for that, how many is on the actual committee?
Right now, we have 7 of us on that committee. My expectation is that that will grow. When we are complete this summer, I would expect we'll have about 10 members of that committee, all faculty.
So Vice Chancellor Bruno has to get going to another meeting soon. Any more questions? And if I can answer questions as well after Denise.
Just to check, is electric static charge the same as static electricity? Is that-
This is a type of charge where you drag your feet on a carpet and you touch, you know, when you used to touch your big sister or whatever, and it was shock. That's what it is. And it's, this is an example of what I said before. You know, now you're talking about state-of-the-art research, you know, the fact that that small a charge, we're not talking about plugging something into a socket. We're talking about something that would be perceptible to you on your skin. Was it enough to ignite this explosion?
Any more questions? All right, thank you very much, everybody. And I'll stay around if you think of anything, any follow-ups. But thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.